so full that we may have to meet this afternoon. I'm going to open the hearing on the Board of Tax Appeals budget. Sade, would you mind beginning? Thank you. First, Sade, I'm sorry. We're going to pause for a point of personal privilege. Senator Holland.
Madam Chair, thank you so much. I'll be very pithy. I want to introduce students from my district today from the Veritas Christian School in Lawrence. We got Elizabeth Rossi, if you could stand, Maddie Malm, and Shay Park. Thank you for being here, ladies.
Welcome to the...
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Thank you. Welcome to the Tax Committee. Sade, thank you.
Okay. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Sade Kane, and I am a fiscal analyst for legislative research. I would note that the chair, Kristen Wheeler, is behind us, and she will be presenting on the BOTA budget after this presentation. The Board of Tax Appeals budget starts on page 473 before you, and the first couple pages are a budget overview, just detailing the mission of the agency as well as the two different divisions within the agency. The executive summary is at the bottom of page 473. On page 474 at the top, you can see a bar graph that outlines SGF versus all other funds. They do have a filing fee fund that assists with paying the agency's expenditures. The agency requests a revised estimate of $2.2 million, including $993,259 SGF in expenditures and 16 FTE positions in fiscal year 2023. The governor recommends revised expenditures of $2.8 million, including $1.6 million SGF in fiscal year 2023. And we'll get into the changes in the next couple pages. For fiscal year 2024, the agency requests $2.2 million, including $1 million SGF in expenditures and 16 FTE positions for fiscal year 2024. And the governor concurs with the agency's fiscal year 2024 request. On page 475, you can see the budget summary by category of expenditure, as well as a state general fund expenditures line graph. The difference between the agency's revised estimate and the governor's recommendation will be detailed in the next few pages as well. Page 476 outlines the fee fund expenditures for the filing fee. And pages 5 and 6 outline the filing fees, current fees for the agency. On page 479, the amount approved by the 2022 legislature was $2,075,715. There was an SGF reappropriation of $15,000. Item number 2 is they have a supplemental request for cloud-based storage. This is including moving from a physical server that they have in their building to a cloud-based environment. And this includes hosting fees for the new environment with the Office of Information Technology. Item number 3 is a supplemental request for computer upgrades. These upgrades will be on a 3-year rotation. So both of these items will be a concurring item in their budget moving forward if approved. And this is upgrading all of their computer equipment. The governor recommendation includes item number 4, which is on page 480, the modernization initiative, which is $590,000 for upgrading the hearing room to offer a remote hearing option, upgrade the agency website, offer electronic form and fee payment options, and other adjustments. And I will note that the agency will provide more detail on that portion of the budget. On page 481 is the fiscal year 2023 change from actual expenditures. Page 482 outlines the fiscal year 2024 analysis. Again, you will see items 1 and 2, the computer upgrades and cloud-based storage, as well as a few other adjustments due to an increase for employer contributions for group health. And item number 4, the governor concurs with the agency's fiscal year 2024 request. And item on page 483, you can see more information on the supplemental requests and the enhancement requests the agency requested. And pages 12 through 14 outline the performance-based budgeting measures and expenditures for the agency. I'm happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Sade. Committee, any questions? I have a couple, but they're more for the board. Sade, I'll be asking about the fee-based and the cloud, whether that's mandatory or not. Thank you.
Thank you.
Committee, welcome, Kristen Wheeler, the chairman of the Board of Tax Appeals.
Thank you.
I think we all want to call you judge.
Oh, please don't. That would be my father, I think. Senator Tyson, members of the committee, it's nice to see those of you again who I've been acquainted with, and nice to meet those of you who are new to the committee. I want to introduce with me, I've got our Executive Director, Jody Allen, and our IT Manager, Gabe Bullard. They are particularly, Mr. Bullard is here to help me if you have specific questions about the IT, as I am most certainly not an IT expert, and he is. I want to try to keep my remarks fairly brief because I know that you do have a full hearing schedule today. And in the materials that we submitted, we tried to be very comprehensive about the, perhaps exhaustively so, about the nature of the change package requests. And I tried to answer all of the questions I thought that you might have in those. But just to give you an idea of what those materials are, if you haven't had a chance to look at them yet, there is an 8-page memorandum that is a very comprehensive overview of our current IT structure and expenditures compared to our change package requests. There is a 1-page summary that was my attempt to boil down that large amount of information into something that you all could just see at a glance what the numbers are. You have our budget narrative, which has more detailed information on our mission, the types and numbers of cases that we hear every year, the amount of time it takes us to resolve those cases, which has been of some interest to this committee in the past. And then we gave you a copy of the submission that we sent to the Spark Committee earlier this year, to the extent that looks a little funny, it's because that was submitted through an online form, and so we had to give you what was basically our working copy of that information. To explain the basis of our FY 2023 request, it does differ somewhat from the governor's recommendation, primarily because of the Spark funding. We were notified on January 31st that we received $225,000 from the Spark Committee. We had requested $521,000. So that leaves a gap of $296,285. The governor's recommendation had been that the legislature fund any amount of that package that was not covered by the Spark Committee. So that amends our FY 2023 request from the $661,860 in the governor's recommendation to, and now I need to look at my own summary, $368,145. And that $368,145 includes $71,860 that would be dedicated to cloud migration to OITS and computer equipment replacement. And Senator Tyson, I know you had a question about that migration to OITS. To give you some background on that, we currently host our entire information technology infrastructure in-house. So our servers are in-house, they're physically located in the Eisenhower building, firewall is maintained in-house. The idea of migration to OITS is that all of our applications and software would then be hosted on the OITS cloud. That migration was planned before I ever joined the board. And it was planned after the board's previous IT employee left. For various reasons that would take entirely too long to discuss, that migration never occurred until now. It wasn't really until we had Mr. Bullard on board that we were able to put pen to paper and calculate the costs of that migration and what that would really look like for the agency. But we have also compared the cost of continuing to host our IT infrastructure in-house, which would mean replacing outdated end-of-life servers every 5 to 7 years at the end of their warranty period, replacing the firewall, maintaining the staffing support necessary to do that. And the cost differential was enormous. And from that, we decided that the most cost-effective solution was to continue with that planned migration to OITS, just in terms of having them host our applications on their servers. The hiccup that we have reached in that and the interconnectedness between our 72,000 change package and what we've requested in the Spark funding has become our document management system. That, as I've mentioned in the materials, is out of date, both from a hardware and software perspective. It's no longer supported by the vendor. It actually runs using Internet Explorer, which some of you may know is no longer supported by Microsoft. And the agency had planned to replace that system through no fault of our own. That contract fell through because the vendor sold to another third party who won't honor the original contract. And OITS will not migrate us with that current document management system because they don't want to assume the risk of operating with that. So it's become imperative to at least replace the document management system as soon as we have the funding available to do that. I think because our materials are so extensive, I will go ahead and just stand for questions if the committee has any.
That would be great, and I thank you for the detail. It's excellent and great information. We'll start with the cloud and OITS. I think it may have been a blessing that you haven't been able to switch over there. I don't know if you're aware, but OITS has been fined at least 2-3 times by the federal government for mismanagement of funds and how they charge our state agencies. I also have concern over, security and other issues. So have you considered the cost of, I know that it does look more costly, but knowing those issues with OITS, maybe you should consider keeping the system isolated, just a consideration.
We have considered that. I can tell you in the fall when we were going through what we thought our budget requests to the committees would be, we were trying to be very mindful of what we requested in terms of an SGF increase, because we knew that if we requested the amount to remain totally in-house, that it was going to look astronomical. And we were concerned about that. Unfortunately, I didn't bring those numbers with me. We had run that calculation in the past. I don't know if Mr. Bullard happens to remember off the top of his head.
Well, in the interest of time and not asking you to pull it, would you mind emailing that to John and he can distribute it to the committee so we can actually take a look at the cost benefit?
We can, and we, I believe, could also get you information on the age of our current servers, because it's more than one server that we're running right now, but we could get you the age of those and how imminently we think we would need to replace all of those.
Understandable. I think it'd be good for the committee to see, though. Committee, I do have one, it came up last year. We weren't able to find a solution. I have grave concern, and I think many of the committee members are, that you're fee-based. And so maybe the possibility of a 5-year period that you don't pay the fee the first time and that we fund out of the SGF or something. We need to find a solution for that so that you guys are not, so that individuals that are appealing their property taxes don't have to pay a fee, but then we understand we don't want the individuals that are abusive of that So we need to find that balancing act.
And that would be entirely within the legislature's prerogative to do that. I can tell you that currently, right now, we're 59% funded off of the fee fund. The remainder is SGF. Our fee fund receipts have been relatively steady or decreasing for the last several years. We do currently exempt single-family residential appeals from fees, nonprofits, and government entities. But other things are subject to a fee. There is a poverty waiver available if we have instituted a new form for people to request that to standardize the process. But the fee fund is what it is.
No, and
the
it's
moment.
not you guys. You guys are doing an excellent job. I do know low-income seniors and others have asked for the poverty, and you guys honor that. So you've done a great job. I just want to try to help find that balance.
Of course.
Somewhere. So are there any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Tyson.
Oh, Senator Kirshen, I'm sorry.
Thank you very much. I just want to introduce my page at the end or something.
So, thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Kirshen?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. With me today is six seniors from Cheney High School, and Ada Meyer, Cale Allenbaugh, and Peyton McCormick. They're here visiting for their pages time.
Well, welcome to the Tax Committee.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Committee will open the hearing, we'll close the hearing on the Board of Tax Appeals budget and open the hearing on Senate Bill 169. We'll probably, if we get a chance, committee, depending on this afternoon, my plan was to work those budgets at 3:30 today, depending on if we're on the floor or not.
Morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Senate Bill number 169 would provide a 4.75% individual income tax rate beginning with tax year 2024. The bill would amend KSA 7932-110, which if you look at your bill, this is the statute that has the brackets. For example, currently a married filing joint return has a tax of 3.1% on the first $30,000 of income, and then it increases to 5.25%, 5.7% based on income levels. The bill itself would provide an individual income tax rate of 4.75 for Kansas taxable income over $10,450 for married individuals filing joint returns, and that same 4.75% on income over $5,225 for all other individuals. This provision would replace those brackets beginning with tax year 2024. What this means is that individuals with Kansas taxable income at or below those two levels, if they're a married filing joint at $10,450 or less, or an other individual has an income of $5,225 or less, they would not have a tax liability. And the bill would take effect from and after publication in the statute book.
Thank you. And committee, any questions? Seeing none, thank you, Amelia. So Senator Holland?
Maybe just a question for research, Madam Chair. I was just wondering, I know this is a committee bill. Do we know the individual who actually introduced the committee bill?
I did.
Thank you.
I requested it. Thank you. Senator, we'll continue the hearing. John has been so meticulous. He's put our conferees in alphabetical order. We do have several of them, and I appreciate it. We do have several conferees, so I would ask that you limit your testimony to 2 to 3 minutes if possible. We need to get through everyone. So welcome to the committee, Michael Austin.
Thank Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm very fortunate to have the last name of Austin and to be the first conferee today. I'm here to speak in support of Senate Bill 169. Excuse me, I represent Americans for Prosperity, Kansas. Want to make sure I get that out. Here to provide support for Senate Bill 169, which provides a flat tax rate or single tax rate of about 4.75% and also increases the standard deduction for certain Kansas tax filers. One reason why we most certainly like this bill is because of the single tax rate. As we all know, of course, taxes can get complicated, whether they're at the federal or at that state tax level. And here in Kansas, we have three graduated income tax rates depending on where your income may fall. By bringing it down to one level, I think it makes it much easier for Kansas taxpayers to understand what their tax burden is going to be. If it really is just a matter of taking 4.75% times their adjusted gross income or their taxable income, that's relatively easier to compute than to figure out which tax bracket you fall in and how that marginal tax bracket applies to that income and so on and so forth. Not only that, but another reason I think that the single tax rate could be beneficial for the state of Kansas is because we've been dealing with a lot of inflation in the past couple of months, at least a year. And the interesting thing about, unfortunately, not interesting, but unfortunately quite tragic, is that when we have high levels of inflation, here in Kansas, our tax code is situated in a way where your income can rise, push you into a higher tax bracket. You would pay higher state income taxes on it, and yet your purchasing power never really changed. And when we're seeing inflation that approach double digits, most certainly now at 6% year over year, then that means that there are Kansas taxpayers that when they start to file, they might move from that either $30,000 to $60,000 if they're married, or $15,000 to $30,000 if they're single, but they can't buy any more goods because the prices are higher, and yet they're paying higher taxes for it. I'm not sure about you, but that worries me, and it makes me think that the tax code isn't fair. So bringing it down to one single tax rate means that whether it's inflation or not, you're going to have the same rate applied to your income no matter what happens in the economy. One more thing, and I'll most certainly hurry this up, thank you, Madam Chair, is that other states are following suit. You know, since state taxation has been a thing, only a couple of states have implemented a flat tax, but in the last 2 years, we've seen about 5 states follow suit, and I think it shows that it can be done here in Kansas. Thank you for your time, and I'll take any questions.
Thank you. Committee questions? Senator Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just have a number of questions for the conferee. So, Michael, thanks for being here today. If I understand this, basically, the question is this fair, correct?
That was one of my contentions,
Is
yes.
that the major one?
I would not know that all three are quite important, but that was one of them for sure.
Okay. So let me just kind of tackle it from this way. You know, we have a number of tax priorities before our committee. And so, you know, this committee has already passed out from the elimination of taxing Social Security. We're excited about looking at sales tax holiday. We're considering eliminating the sales tax on small businesses. This obviously has a price tag, and it's significantly bigger in the out years than the other ones. How does this impact, from your perspective, the priorities as far as where does this line up with the other competing tax policies we're looking at? How does this fit in?
If I may, Senator Holland, I'd love to ask a clarifying question. Is there one other policy in particular you'd like me to compare this to? I can't necessarily compare it to all the different bills that have been out there.
You're a think tank. You track the stuff that goes through our committee. I'm just wondering how does this rank as far as priority from your perspective with the other things before our committee?
Yes, I understand. And just for point of clarification, is there a particular bill you would like me to compare it to? And then I could answer that question. Okay, well then I'll just say here that in testifying for Senate Bill 169, we most certainly stand in support of it because we feel like having a single tax rate can be beneficial for Kansas taxpayers.
But you have no comment as far as how it ranks with others?
If you provide me a policy to compare it to, I can tell you how it compares.
So for example, like
I'm sorry, Senator, could you be concise? I didn't allow when I divided up by who's testifying for a lot of time on questions. I apologize. Please continue, but know that we've got a bunch more conferees.
Okay. So I guess let's shift from how does this fit into the other tax priorities before us? Let's shift into what we're already on the hook to pay for. Okay, this does have a very extensive fiscal note in the out years. Not quite the Brownback stuff, but close to it. And so my question is the state has already basically, they're on the hook for the Panasonic deal. You have several hundreds of dollars are going to be paid out over a number of years. We have now the semiconductor stuff that we're doing. I guess my point is that forget about the policy arguments, if this is good or not. How do we pay for all this stuff for the bill as its currently fiscal note sits, particularly if we have an impending recession coming on and we know those state tax coffers that are flush with federal dollars, that eventually goes away?
Fair question. Well, I would like to point out that before COVID and the flush of either Fed money came into being, the state budget had a surplus. So there are state funds available in order to buy down or not buy down, which I say revise our tax code to make it more simpler. Not only that, but I would always make a request that you could always find efficiencies in the budget in order to make a tax reform package more feasible. Something that we've done here at Americans for Prosperity, along with the Kansas Policy Institute, is we've looked at the state budget, highlighting inefficiencies according to performance-based budgeting, and we proposed a report where legislators can ask questions and find efficiencies. So as it always goes to saying, there are multiple ways to skin a cat, but it most certainly is feasible to find a way to make taxes simpler and fairer for more Kansans.
Okay, thank you. And final question, Madam Chair. This obviously has a very significant fiscal note. The Brownback tax experiment, it was more, but that created our budget, and we had problems budgeting later on in later years. My question to you is this. With the think tank that you're with, would you guys, I guess what's always bugged me about tax policy in general is that for the really big fiscal notes, it's like we consider it in a vacuum and we don't take into effect what we're on the hook to pay for, the critical services for the state of Kansas. My question is, would you have a recommendation as far as any major tax pieces coming out of, and say just tie it to a number, that we always dual track maybe through the appropriations, the Ways and Means process? So in essence, the right hand knows what the left hand's doing?
Yes, and that's part of, just the lobbying portion that we take here at Americans for Prosperity. We have testimony in front of taxes about how we can make taxes simpler and fair for Kansans, and then we'll speak to Ways and Means or to the House chamber about how we can find ways to pare down the budget to find those efficiencies.
I guess what I'm saying
So,
is would
Senator, that's on process? No, I appreciate the question, but it's on process, it's not on the bill. And we do need to get through the conferees.
My only point, Madam Chair, is that would you recommend that we actually dual track this bill?
We do, we usually do.
Okay, thank you.
I watch the budget, I look at the spending, I look at the tax bills.
Okay.
There is coordination going on.
Thank you.
It may not be public, but it is, myself and others are tracking that. So, thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Eric Stafford, welcome to the Tax Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, committee members. Eric Stafford with the Kansas Chamber here in support of Senate Bill 169. Appreciate this bill being introduced by the chair. It's similar to Senate Bill 328 from last year. I believe the difference from last year's bill compared to this one is just the income exclusion in that, which does increase the fiscal note. So out of that, I think if I was just looking correctly, 500 million, 540 million. Last year's bill was 200 the first year and 150 after that. So to go to 4.75 of a single rate, you're looking at roughly 150 million based off last year's fiscal note on just the rate adjustment, and then the rest would be caused by the exclusion. Similar to a bill that we introduced, which would have gone to 5%, we do support cutting taxes. Our president and CEO just sent me a text this morning of a CBS News article that 21 states have cut income taxes the last 2 years. So they're doing what this committee is considering and the legislature is considering, and providing tax relief to all Kansans because of the record revenues that we have been experiencing. Our revenues are up 30% over the last 2.5 years. I mean, $7 billion for SGF spending in 2020, and now we're going to be pushing 10. So we're pretty confident that we have the resources to cut taxes and still maintain a balanced budget and provide equitable services to what we're providing today. One provision that is included in Senate Bill 61, which is the single rate bill that we introduced, that is not in Senate Bill 169, and we would ask for the committee to consider, is the trigger mechanism to buy down both personal and corporate income taxes that was modeled off of North Carolina. In our bill today deals with the revenue estimates. The Tax Foundation says that they prefer looking at actual dollar amounts or providing a percentage increase of state spending, and anything over that is used to buy down rates versus using the consensus revenue estimating process. But in the drafting with the revisers, we weren't quite sure prior to session where to put those dollar amounts, and so we just drafted it through the consensus revenue estimating process. But the goal there would be to provide long-term relief, still provide adequate growth in state receipts, but also provide continued buy down of rates, whether you want to go to 0, whether you want to go to 2, 3%. On personal and corporate income taxes, but we would ask as the legislature considers tax reform that we continue to buy down growth like the governor of Arkansas has called for their legislature to consider. So happy to answer any questions at the appropriate time. I do want to point out too, some of the arguments that were made on the House side yesterday on a similar bill was, what's equitable and what's everybody's fair share of taxes and tax liability. The table 4 on our testimony breaks out 2019 data, I believe it is, of 0 to 25,000. What's their percentage of adjusted gross income, but what's their tax liability, all the way up to over 250,000. And you'll see where the bulk of the taxes are being paid, but do appreciate the fact that this bill does include an exclusion to avoid increasing taxes on low-income earners. So happy to answer any questions at the appropriate time, but do appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Any questions? Senator Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Eric, thanks for being here today.
Sure.
So some questions. The state chamber, a lot of your charter members, how does this specifically benefit them?
They pay taxes. They're individual taxpayers as well, as addition to the businesses. So the corporate rate, the 2 Apex projects, our bill that we introduced in this committee would take both personal and corporate to 5%. The corporate rate is set to go to 6% because of the 2 Apex projects. So we have seen some tax relief on the corporate side, which if we could, we're not asking to take corporate down to 475 in this bill like the individual side, but if we could get a growth trigger to buy both rates down through growth in receipts, we would appreciate that. So, but I mean, from the individual side, we pay individual income taxes. And even for our small businesses that are pass-through entities, this would be how they would be taxed.
Senator Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So second question would be, is that our surrounding states that are, for example, that have heavy industrial ag base, I'm thinking Nebraska, Iowa, what type of income tax structure, personal income tax structure do they have in place? Do you know that?
I do, because of my handy Tax Foundation Facts and Figures app. Nebraska, and they're looking at some tax cuts. I've heard they are a 4-tier system. Iowa, I believe, just signed into law some changes, or are considering Iowa. Yeah, they're like a 7 or 8 tier, but their top rate is 8.5. Colorado voters just approved to reduce their, it was a ballot initiative in Colorado, and they just voted to reduce their personal income tax rate down to 4.25%. Missouri's at 4.
I'm going to cut you off there. We can get that information from
Sure.
research on the states that are currently at a single rate bracket and states that are going to.
Perfect.
I should have never said we're running short on time because everybody is kind of taking advantage of it. Are there any other questions for Eric? Seeing none, thank you, committee. Thank you, Eric. Our next conferee is Dave Trobert. Welcome to the Tax Committee. It's the first time we've seen you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, it's a pleasure to be here. Yes, it is my first time this year. We stand in support of Senate Bill 169. I'd like to start by covering a few reasons why tax relief is necessary in Kansas. First of all, and I think this gets to Senator Holland's question, if the Kansas tax system had a marketing slogan, it would probably be, well, at least we're not Nebraska. Because everybody around us has a better overall tax scheme than Kansas. And not that taxes are the only reason, but we lost population last year. The year ended July 2022. Kansas was one of only 18 states that lost population. That's accelerating a trend. It used to be we would lose on domestic migration, but the birth rate would exceed the death rate, and so you'd have a small increase. Now we're losing overall. Kiplinger says Kansas is the third worst state for taxation on retirees. The Tax Foundation says Kansas has the highest effective tax rate on mature businesses, and part of the reason they say is because how much money is given away in subsidies to try to attract new ones. We're in our fifth straight decade of economic stagnation. The gap between Kansas and the national growth average on jobs, economic activity, GDP and so forth is getting worse. And that's not going to change until we change some of the structure that's contributing to that. And even if we stand still, we keep falling farther and farther behind. There's no question, if you look at the data, that the states that have lower tax burdens have superior economic growth. They have superior job creation, GDP, wage growth. It's how you get there. And that brings me to, I know the Brownback issue was raised, and yeah, there was a lot of problems with that Brownback tax plan. But it wasn't the concept of tax cuts, it was the way it was implemented. At the same time Kansas had challenges, states like Indiana and Tennessee and North Carolina successfully cut taxes. It can be done, but you have to do it right. And unfortunately, in the book that we wrote, What Was Really the Matter with the Kansas Tax Plan, we interviewed Governor Brownback, and we found that at no point did he have a plan to implement that. Not even the skinny part that was $350 million over 5 years. There was never a plan. There were plans available. He had one from his state budget director. Our analysis showed a small reduction in state spending would have balanced the budget and allowed spending to grow with revenues thereafter, but there was never a plan. And in fact, the budget deficits were allowed to happen because there were opportunities to balance the budget, to reduce the spending. Democrats and Republicans and Governor Brownback would not entertain that. So that we allowed that to happen as a state. I'd say one other thing, inflation's come up. This would also help offset the tax increase that Kansas is imposing on people because most people don't understand it, but there's an inflation tax that we pay. I'll give you an example. Married family with 2 kids, I think it was around $40,000, $50,000. They get a 2% pay increase. Their state income tax goes up 3.3%. But if their employer gave them a bigger increase to try to offset inflation, let's say it was a 7% increase, their state tax bill goes up 12%. That's an inflation tax. It's partly because you get pushed to a higher bracket. It's partly because Kansas is one of the few states that doesn't index standard deductions and other things for inflation. So you pay an inflation tax. And so we need it. It can be done responsibly. And we should look long-term and ensure that it's done responsibly. But we need it, and we appreciate your consideration of this bill.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Okay.
Next up is Dennis Hall. Dennis, we just have a couple of minutes. We need to get to the opponents, please. But welcome to the Tax Committee.
Hi, good morning, Madam Chair and of the committee. I hope you can hear me all right. I will be very brief here, but I and on behalf of Americans for Tax Reform and Grover Norquist believe that Kansas should join the movement of states that is moving in droves to a flat tax and bringing their income tax rate ultimately to zero. Even in the region next to Kansas, there are several states this session that are considering a flat tax, including North Dakota, which would bring its rate down to 1.5%, which would be the lowest in the nation, and also, I believe, Oklahoma as well. But 21 states around the nation are now under a total flat tax regime, and 8 states, soon to be 9, have ultimately taken their rate down to zero. This would benefit small businesses. It encourages investment in the state of Kansas and new businesses and entrepreneurs to move to the state of Kansas. Small businesses such as LLCs, pass-throughs, and S-corps are generally all taxed according to the personal side of the code. So revising the personal income tax to a flat rate would encourage new businesses to move to Kansas. And additionally, I will point out that this is quite fair in light of the fact that most Kansans are already paying the middling income tax bracket of 5.25%. That is set at the $15,000 threshold, and the vast majority of Kansans do make over $15,000 and are paying a higher rate than the one that is proposed in SB 169. So the last thing I'll say is that I would also encourage, along with Eric Stafford, for Kansas to move towards some sort of revenue trigger. It's a responsible way to reduce the income tax rate in the future and ultimately join the movement of states that is taking their rate to zero. It's a low, you can make it a low threshold, but it keeps the state financial budget healthy, even as residents can enjoy permanent relief on the income tax front. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Committee, any questions? Seeing none, thank you, Dennis, for your testimony. Committee, I'll draw your attention to the proponent's written testimony. Are there any other proponents? Seeing none, we'll move to opponents. Emily Fetch. Welcome, Emily.
Good morning, Chairwoman Tyson and members of the committee. My name is Emily Fetch, and I'm the Director of Fiscal Policy at Kansas Action for Children. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in opposition to Senate Bill 169. We oppose this bill due to its regressive structure that will overwhelmingly benefit high-income Kansans, while low-income families could see their tax liabilities increase. This proposal will drain revenue at a time when childcare, healthcare, and special education continue to remain underfunded. While this proposal taxes nearly all taxpayers at the same rate, it's not a fair tax. Even with the current graduated income tax structure, the total effective tax rate with the highest income Kansans is substantially lower than for other income groups. In my written testimony, I have more detail, but the lowest 20% of Kansans in terms of income have an effective total tax rate, and by that I mean property, income, and sales tax, of 10.7%. While the top 1% has an effective tax rate of just 7.4%. If proposals like these are implemented, they could create an environment where other tax increases to property tax, sales tax, excise taxes could need to be implemented to make up for declining income tax contributions. And those changes could end up costing low and middle income Kansans more than what they would receive from a proposal like this one. Kansas Action for Children opposes a flat tax like Senate Bill 169 because it equates to yet another large tax break for Kansans with the most financial resources. And thank you for your time, and I'm happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Emily. Committee, any questions? I have a couple of quick ones. Did you testify against the tax bill in 2017?
I was not here in 2017.
Okay. I was.
So I don't know.
Okay. Thank you. The reason I ask is because that was the largest tax increase ever, and it was a massive tax increase on low-income Kansas. It was extremely heartbreaking. So I appreciate your testimony. Committee, any other questions for Emily? Seeing none, thank you very much. John Lee, welcome to the Tax Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. We are tax research and economics professor with 15 publications. We support to reduce income tax for all people if we can balance our budget. but we do not support in this tax bill because of 5 reasons. First is this bill will reduce $500 million. Where can you find the extra $500 million? And number 2, for income with 1 million, so the income tax will reduced by $9,290. You can check this form. And number 4 is this bill still have 2 brackets, 2 status, 4 taxable income range under 32 with the holding formulas. So this is not simple. And number 5, our existing and personal tax system is very complex with 3 major problems, with 48 with holding formulas, 22 page with holding tables, multiple brackets, also 8-page tax tables. This bill cannot resolve these tax problems. So I put years under the table with comparison, existing, and also is SB 196. Also is if we make a slight modification. So, for example, for under tax brackets, and I have this tax under modification has benefit, we can keep a 2 bracket. For withholding formula, in existing 48, and this bill 32, and modification 2. For tax withholding table and existing 22 pages, this bill and modification can be 0 pages. That's good. But the major problem is tax revenue. And this bill will be reduced by 500 million. So for modification, it's neutral. Also for future tax reform and existing complex, and this bill and modification simple. We're talking about the flat tax rate has a research, and flat tax rate is too simple, rough, and unreasonable for individuals and corporations. Our first goal is to have.
We're about out of time, and we have your testimony. I know you're reading it.
Okay.
We do have your testimony. Will you stand for questions? Committee, any questions? Mr. Lee, I have a couple questions. So where are you from?
I'm from is a present is we have like a personal is interested to do the tax simplification.
So where do you live? Where's your business?
So I live in Olathe, Kansas.
Okay.
I have full-time job as engineer,
Okay.
chemical engineer.
Okay. And the last time we spoke, I think you were in St. Louis or had ties to St. Louis. And I was curious why a St. Louis organization?
A professor and in the Park University in Missouri side.
Okay. So what is the maximum percentage an individual can pay in income tax according to your equation?
And that's according to the, but this year's, we have a research paper and to discuss how to have under like fair, also balanced tax system.
Maximum amount.
It's
It's a high percentage.
that is dependent budget.
Yeah. Okay. Wonderful. Any other questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you very much, Mr. Lee.
Thank you.
Committee, I will draw your attention to written testimony opponents. Are there any other opponents? Seeing none, we do have neutral testimony. We're about to run out of time. Sean Gatewood. Welcome to the Tax Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, I'll make it real fast. My name's Sean Gatewood. I'm with the CanCare Advocates Network. My job here in the legislature is mostly to look out for all the folks served by the CanCare, the Kansas Medicaid program, sort of, and try to bring folks together to speak as one. And With the tax committee, this isn't normally where I show up. I would rather just stay in my lane. But on occasion, when we have large bills like this, I just want to sort of remind the committee of some of our obligations and some of the things that are kind of forthcoming or have been kind of a trend. So a couple of things to be considering is we have a decrease in our FMAP that is falling off this year, which is the federal match rate for Medicaid funds. That has been kind of propping up a lot of sort of federal money that is in the Medicaid program and in the general fund broadly. And that's all sort of going away. We also have wait lists that have been, discussed quite a bit. And I looked back because I testified to the tax committee a couple of years ago when there were some other considerations then, and those wait lists have actually increased at a time when the state coffers have been at sort of record numbers. So we've actually increased both the DD and the PD waivers by 200-300 folks apiece. All of that is because we just simply don't have the capacity. We don't have the manpower out there and to sort of aid the folks living in their homes around the state. There are efforts underway, sort of building a new waiver, those kinds of things, and that investment is sort of forthcoming. There's staffing shortages all over the state in every aspect of healthcare, particularly along the state borders. And so again, my job is not
to lose the room.
Yep.
Can you make your points really
Yep, my job again is just that we have the money, and I will stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? Senator Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be very brief. Would you feel better about this bill if it was dual track through appropriations, if it got out of tax?
I'm sorry, Senator, I don't know that I understand the question.
Would you feel better if this bill policy was dual track through Ways and Means?
I don't know that I have a position. Yeah.
That's a process
Thank you, Madam
question.
Chair.
It's not a question on the bill. So thank you very much. Committee, Scott Rothschild.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. I will speak very quickly. KSB supports an equitable mix of revenues that are suitable to support public services, including funding for quality education. Education is an economic investment. Our concerns about this bill are that it could have an indirect negative impact on the future school finance plan approved by the legislature, governor, and the Kansas Supreme Court that aims to provide suitable school finance, including the approved inflationary adjustments. Our Kansas school leaders are extremely appreciative of the funding increases from the Gannon settlement. We believe that investment has helped produce impressive results for Kansas students, from record graduation rates, increasing numbers of students going on to post-secondary success, including those benefiting from the Kansas Promise Scholarship Act. There are certainly areas that need improvement, just as there are in every endeavor, but Kansas public schools are on the right track, making sure that our students receive the skills they need to lead successful lives. These gains have been made during the worst disruption of education in 100 years. Now and in the future, schools and other public services will need increased funding to compensate for rising costs and the ability for districts to pay suitable wages to recruit and retain highly qualified staff to promote student success. The fiscal note on this bill is substantial, as it is for other tax proposals. Because of this, we urge caution to ensure we are not setting up future legislatures for failure, and that any any tax proposals focus on helping those families who are living paycheck to paycheck. I will stand for any questions.
Thank you, Scott. Committee, any questions? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Thank you. Committee, we have one last conferee, Nick Stark. Nick, are you online?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we have about 1 minute. I'm sorry,
Yep, I'll
Nick.
be brief.
Okay,
No, that's
thank
fine.
you.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you, members of the committee. I just want to be really brief and discuss just kind of some of the myths real fast. There's this preconception that the flat tax is regressive. That's not necessarily true. I would argue that the progressive tax system is probably more regressive, because what you're doing with a progressive system is you're punishing people that want to make more income. You're taxing that, you're taking that away from them. A flat tax, as we've seen in multiple states over the last 40 or so years, has really led to improved economic growth and with that personal income growth. You take the example of North Carolina and Utah specifically, they switched about a decade ago and they've seen record growth ever since. We've seen North Carolina go from about 26th rank in Rich States, Poor States, our annual publication, to second best in the nation now for economic outlook. Really quickly, too, I just want to mention that the Brownback tax reforms, there's this myth that there was no economic growth during that time. I would argue that that's not exactly accurate. There was definitely, once taxes were raised again, that's what kind of undid some of the potential economic growth. And really, the other thing that kind of went along with that was the oil prices and agriculture prices started to hit Kansas especially hard as those prices dropped.
So Nick,
controlling for that, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry, we're going to lose the room. In
That's
fact,
fine.
we should have been out of it 5 minutes ago. So, committee, any
problem.
questions for Nick? Seeing none, thank you, Nick, very much.
Thank you.
Are there any other neutral? Seeing none, we're going to close the hearing on Senate Bill, I don't even know, 169. Committee, is there any other business to be brought before us? Seeing none, committee, I'll make an announcement on the floor depending on how the floor debate goes, but we are planning on meeting at 3:30 this afternoon. We will work the 2 budgets that we heard, and we will work bills previously heard. No other business? We're adjourned.